Hey, you guys, boy, I really hope this works because I do not feel good and I am exhausted and I would really like to go to sleep. I'll be honest, it is about 11 o'clock. It's actually almost exactly 11 o'clock, last night from when you watch this. Um, so sorry you can't see me because I'm sick. Haven't done my hair. I would just look silly. So just to be as professional as I possibly can, considering the situation, you're just gonna hear my voice, which is fine. So just so you know, I have COVID. It's not a severe case, but I definitely don't feel good. It's kind of wiped me out, and but I expect to be back in class in person on Tuesday. Um, so just for today, this is how we're going to do this. So I'm just going to give you my lecture tonight, then I am going to bed. I will be talking to you at some point because I will be hosting, Zoom in the event that anybody needs my help. But otherwise, this will be how you'll get this lesson. So we are now on topic 2 of the international relations theory, and today we're going to continue to describe the major theories of IR and their primary tenets. Oh, by the way, so we didn't get to finish the sharing of information from um, Wednesday. That is totally fine. Don't worry about it. We're not going to do that today. We'll do that when we come back in person next Wednesday. So we'll just finish that up because I think it's only going to take us like 5-10 minutes. So it shouldn't be a big deal. So just please try to remember to make sure that you bring that stuff with you on Wednesday when we are in person the next time. So that way we can finish that up. All right, let's rock and roll. Oh yeah, so just a little bit of housekeeping. The ambassador of Brazil is coming to Grand Canyon on Wednesday, February 9th at 9 a.m. So you have every opportunity to be able to go and do that. I unfortunately have a class at 9 a.m. I don't think I'm going to be able to take that class with me, but you guys would have the opportunity to come and speak to, I believe to Nestor, to him on Wednesday, go see him speak, maybe beat him and so forth. And then you can come to class at 11. So unless you have another class at 9 a.m., I'm not going to ask that you ditch that class, but if you don't, I will offer some extra credit. We'll talk about this in the coming weeks, but I will offer you some extra credit for attending that meeting. All right. So today, again, we are continuing the describing of the major theories. And today we're going to focus most primarily on realism. It's kind of the most important theory of them all. I mean, liberalism is the second biggest, and it's probably like 1A, 1B actually, now that I'm kind of saying that out loud. But we're going to really hit on realism and liberalism most, and realism kind of in particular is getting referenced a lot. So the theoretical framework of this theory has held a central position. It's kind of like I said, it's kind of the primary. It's the big guy. It's the big one in the study of IR for many decades. Truthfully, I say decades kind of from an American perspective, but it really is kind of the historic theory here. I mean, it's something that dates back, and I'm going to give you a brief history here in a few moments, that dates back literally to the ancient Greeks. So its foundations, is in the principle of dominance. It's the dominance of one nation over another. It's kind of a historical matter of ways that nations and nation states, peoples, tribes, and so forth have kind of realized their political authority over another and realized their dominance over another through this kind of realism perspective. Even if they didn't know the name, they've kind of lived by it. It's a very, very natural human kind of theory for groups of people to take against another. So the school of thought explains international relations in terms of power and one state holding power over another or over many, and both in a regional sense, say it'd be the United States holding power over the North American continent, or actually going back to Madison, over the Western Hemisphere, or no, that wasn't Madison. Yeah, it was. I'm doubting my own knowledge of history, but regardless, dating back to America's kind of hegemony over the Western Hemisphere, or it could be in terms of over the world. I suppose the United States might be able to state on some level that it has some sort of influence over the entire planet. That's not entirely accurate. It's certainly very, very slightly accurate, but regardless, one might say that. And then also, this is realism, also known as realpolitik, or also just known as power politics. So I'm not going to discuss realpolitik or power politics, but in essence, or in international relations, you'll hear about it a lot when you just hear talking heads talking about American role in certain regions of the world. You might hear that term or read that term probably more frequently, realpolitik or power politics. Just for what it's worth, that's also realism is what they're referencing. So realism developed in reaction to the liberal tradition that realists called idealism. So idealism emphasized international law, morality, and international organizations rather than power alone as influences on international events. So the idealists believe that human nature is basically good. And they start from the position of human nature is basically good. Everybody's just looking out for everybody's looking out for themselves, but they don't necessarily want to conquer or hurt others for their own, safety and so forth. This theory was particularly active in the Western, or at least the Western world, between World Wars I and II. The League of Nations, which was Woodrow Wilson's liberal idealist baby, was a direct offshoot of this Western world philosophy developing. The structure, unfortunately, as we've discussed in the past, proved to be helpless to stop the Germans and Italians and Japanese imperialist aggressions. And so I like to say, I wish you could see me. I'm shaking my fist. Damn you, Neville Chamberlain. If you don't know what I'm referencing, he met with Hitler and he said, he came back to England and he got off the plane. He held a press conference. He held up his document. He said, there will be peace in our time. Such an idealist. 600,000, or excuse me, 20 million, 60 million dead later. And Neville Chamberlain proved to be a putz. So, or putz, I guess actually is I believe that's Yiddish. Putz is, I think, the better pronunciation. So since World War II, realists have blamed idealists for looking too much at how the world ought to be rather than how it is. They're idealists. They want to see the world in its best place, whereas realists say, okay, well, we want to get there as well. No realist says let's keep the world in shambles. What they do say is it's not there. Now how do we use our power to push it to where you idealists want it to be? And so human nature is not basically good according to the realists, and the good will have to fight the bad to hold the bad at bay, rather than just wish the bad would become good, or rather than believe the bad are only bad because the good aren't as good as they think they are. In a modern reference, oh my goodness, I cannot bloody breathe. In a modern reference in 2002, 33 IR scholars signed, and I vividly remember this too. I wish I actually I should have pulled a screenshot of this. I feel like a bum. So 33 international relations scholars signed a New York Times ad warning that, quote, war with Iraq is not in America's national interest. As a result of the problems faced in the war in Iraq, neoconservatives, or the neoconservative influence, and that means war hawk liberal essentially, in United States foreign policy had diminished, and realist influence has increased. Although, while that has been true over the last 20 years, I will argue now under Biden, even more so than Obama, now under Biden. And I do actually think, in part because of the COVID pandemic, idealism has taken hold once again in the West and in the United States. All right, so our first what say you? What do say you? Is mankind basically good or bad? Go ahead. If first off, I wish I had said this before. I totally spaced. You have to be taking notes. I will make a note of this in the announcement, so hopefully you see that. You have to be taking notes throughout the entire lecture to show that you listen. I'm hoping to keep this under 45 minutes, by the way. That way, with pauses, you're gonna, it's gonna push you up to a more general class length. And so, plus, I just cannot breathe, and it's driving me nuts. So, You have to be taking notes throughout to show you paid attention. That'll be your participation. One of the things that you have to highlight, just show, is the what say you. I don't need a full paragraph necessarily, even if that's what you have to give me to be able to give a full answer. That's perfectly fine. But for what say you, just a couple of sentences that just kind of explains as you would have in class. Unfortunately, can't have a debate, but that's totally fine. I just still want you to contemplate and really kind of think, and that places you in the context of the conversation. So, what say you? Go ahead and pause. Ready, set, go. And we're back. So realists tend to treat political power as separate from and predominant over the ideals and theorems, essentially, of morality, ideology, as well as other social and economic aspects of life. So states pursue their own interests in an international system of sovereign states without a central authority. Now I'm going to preview this. I'm going to say that is in essence anarchy. If you think about it, no central authority. So again, I'm going to dive into this a little bit heavier here in a few moments. But if you think about it, what is the idea of anarchy? No central authority. It's people just doing whatever they want to do. What do nations do? They essentially live in a world of anarchist governments, in that none of them necessarily have any authority holding, standing over them. So just keep that in mind. So just a little brief. Oh, oops! This is a little out of order. I screwed that up. Hilarious. Okay, well, so I'm going to say Theodesis first is the father of the school of political realism. He's the oldest of the bunch. He determined that the balance of power was dependent upon the stability. This is, by the way, the history of realism. Theodesis determined that the balance of power was dependent upon the stability of the hierarchy of the most powerful states. Thus, if the most powerful states were in a stable position, regardless of the situation, regardless of who was in power, if they were in a stable position, if they were willing to accept their state's position in a world order, then there would be peace. When that power is questioned, that is war. And it is because that is the shifting of power among those primary states, those hegemonic states. So think to World War II in particular. What was Germany trying to do? Germany was trying to shift the power of authority in the European theater, in Europe. What was Japan trying to do? They were trying to militarily, in both cases, shift the power and authority in Asia. What did the United States try to do? The United States tried to maintain the status quo. So they were trying to be the balancing power. And in essence, the United States ends up being the balancing power because we bring things back into balance, and we help. Of course, we help Germany. We help Italy. We help Japan reintegrate themselves back into the world scene, and basically, give them opportunity while also accepting their positions lesser than the kind of world powers. So then when lesser states war, it does not affect the balance of power. So I've been kind of thinking of like the war in Syria, that kind of thing, with the United States out of it. It's a lesser state, and the neighboring states that are involved, they are lesser states. It doesn't change the world power. The United States, China, Russia, England, so on and so forth, they are not threatened by this. Thus, again, the balance of power is determined and dependent upon the stability of the hierarchy of the most powerful states. So now Sun Tzu. And so back down on the bottom left, that's Theodesis, and that is Sun Tzu right there. So Sun Tzu was a Chinese general, a military strategist, a writer, and a philosopher. He's a fascinating fellow. You've probably at least come to contact with his book, Art of War, which is based on realist theory. Again, whether or not he ever used that term, I don't believe he did, but that is in essence what he was describing from the Chinese perspective. And so he thrived on the realist preemption thrived on realist preemption, which is based on the assumption that enemies are characteristically aggressive at any moment. Thus, you must live militarily on the offensive, or even if not on the offensive, not necessarily then on the defensive, prepared for war with the expectation of invasion. But if you are Think about it though. If you are preparing for war and you've got an enemy who you believe is going to invade, if they are the aggressor, then suddenly they have the upper hand. So that's also part of Sun Tzu's perspective and realist perspective is that, okay, my enemy is preparing for war. I must beat him to the punch. I must catch him unprepared. I must catch him off guard. So now I have preemptive strikes that prevent either longer wars or prevent the possibility or less the possibility of loss on your side. So his perspectives shaped how war was fought straight through to the Napoleonic Wars of 1803 to 1815. Thomas Hobbes was an English philosopher, somebody you've studied, I'm positive, for most of your schooling. He is the father of political, he is one of, the forefathers of political realism. He believed human nature was evil. And he wrote that, quote, only the unlimited power of a sovereign could contain human passions that disrupt the social order and threaten civilized life. Now, one of the reasons why I'm not a Hobbes fan is because I think he makes a solid point there, but what does he say? That sovereign must be a king. So he actually argued in defense of monarchies that are unelected, familial, and passed down, and all that garbage. I'm pretty sure I've ranted about that in our class, but maybe I haven't. So I won't right now just because I need to stop talking. And I'm sure I've got some talking to go. But regardless, that's, there we go. And then finally, Hans Morgenthau. He was a German American. I say German American. He was born in Germany, lived in the United States. 20th century major figure of realist theory and international relations. His theory is based on 6 parts, which are the kind of the second innermost bullets. And that is politics is government by objective laws. So politics is based on human nature and psychology, and thus that is how laws are developed and designed, is based on human nature and psychology. 2 is national interest is defined in terms of power, and that is either gaining power or maintaining power or hypothetically even giving away power. The concept of power, number 3, must be adapted to the changing circumstances of the world. In other words, if you are maintaining power and the world changes and you start to lose it, you must adjust to maintain it. Moral principles, number 4, cannot be applied to states' action. So the individual may say, let justice be done even if the world perishes, but the state may not do that. Because if the state falls, then the people fall. So an individual can take that sacrifice, but the state cannot because the state represents so much more. Individual may sacrifice himself in defense of moral principle, but again, the state has not the right to sacrifice its liberty for moral principles because, again, who it represents. It's more, the state is more than just an individual. The state is the representative of us all. So moral principles cannot be applied to the state's actions because its primary principle is the protection, its own survival, because its own survival means the survival of its citizens. Number 5, no identification between moral aspirations of a nation and universal moral laws. National interest saves a nation from political folly and moral excess, and all nations pursue their policies with respect to their own nation while promoting their own interests. So this is realism. All nations pursue their policies with respect to their own nation while promoting their own interests. This is also, so within realism, this is also, again, in essence, anarchy. And finally, the political sphere of realism is autonomous. So political realism puts non-political standards, i.e. economics, moralism, law, in subordination to the standards of politics. Legalist, moralistic, and other schools of thought are separated from political realism because they impose non-political standards within the political sphere, and it prevents states from actively acting upon their political needs, which again is self-preservation. And hypothetically, legalism, that is laws that have been, again, based on human nature and psychology, those laws could get in the way of the livelihood of the state. Morals, same. Other schools, so that is why. So the political sphere of political realism must remain autonomous because it must succeed in survival, it must succeed to thrive. It cannot be burdened by rules from outside schools of thought. So finally, for this section, just kind of assumptions of realism and idealism, just a good comparison I found. So the issue of human nature under realism, human nature is selfish. The idealists see human nature as altruistic. So it's kind of good and evil, good, bad, right, and wrong. The most important actors in realism are the states. Idealists say states and others, including individuals. So, but again, the state is saying in realism, in realism, the most important actor must be the state because of who the state represents. It represents so much more than just itself. The issue of causes of state behavior, realists say, are rational pursuit of self-interest. Once again, idealism, psychological motives of decision makers. And finally, the nature of the international system is anarchy. Idealists say community. So what say you? And excuse me, I wrote, oops, why did that change? I wrote liberal like a goofball. This is supposed to be idealist. So forgive me. So what say you? It is better for a state currently in the position of superpower status to act as realists theorists prescribe, or as idealist theorists prescribe. So again, while without saying it, I am stating the United States here. So it is better for a state currently in the position of superpower status of the world to act as realist theorists prescribe, or as idealist theorists prescribe. So again, forgive me for that one. That was just a silly typo. Go ahead, hit pause, ready, set, go. And we're back. All right. So now into the discussion of power. Let's talk about power constantly. What is power? So power is the central concept of pretty much all international relations. You might not have the power to tell somebody what to do, but you most certainly want to at least have the power to do what you want to do. So power is the central concept for the realist political theory lens, if you will. However, it is difficult to measure. So I just want to start, before we even get into it, in your mind, who is more powerful in the world today? The United States or Russia? Consider all scenarios. Consider options such as allies and enemies of both states. Who is more powerful today? Go ahead and pause. Ready, set, go. And we're back. All right, so let's try to define power. So power is often defined as the ability to get another actor to do what it would not otherwise have done, or vice versa. And so the more power you have, the more you can convince another actor on the world stage to do something it otherwise didn't want to do. If actors get their way a lot, they must be quite powerful. So excuse me. Power is not influence itself, but it is the ability or the potential to influence others. So it is based on specific tangible and intangible characteristics or possessions of states. So that includes sizes of the state, levels of income, GDP, which we're going to get into a lot, and the armed forces. The capability is easier to measure than influence. Oh gosh, how did I do this? So power is not influence itself, the ability to potentially influence others. Capability is easier to measure than influence. Oh, the capability to do something is easier to measure than physical illness, and it's also less circular logic. Can get less stuck less in circular logic. And there's the idea of influencing one who influences you, who influences you. So capability is simply just the power to influence is easier to measure than just kind of the idea of influence on a psychological, philosophical sense. So the single indicator of state's power may not be its total GDP, which is gross domestic product, which basically just means wealth. And obviously, wealth buys power, it buys the influence because you can buy and you can buy off. So at best, however, the GDP is just a rough indicator of overall wealth. Is the state's tangible capabilities, including the military forces, which represent material power. So power also depends on the material elements. However, national will, with the will of the people to grow and develop, to be nationalistic, to push themselves, to influence, and so on and so forth. Diplomatic skill, that is the diplomats of the world who work behind the scenes to be able to prevent war, to build relationships, so on and so forth. Popular support for the government. Without good support for the government is illegitimate, then they lose power and strength, and ultimately they will fall, and etc. So power depends on more than just material things like gross domestic product and the military. It's got a great number of untangible things that cannot be measured, cannot be bartered with. So power can also explain so much. Real world IR depends on many other elements, including even incidences of luck. So relation that could, oh my gosh, that the idea of the luck factor is, can be defined in so many different ways. The luck of where a nation happens to be, the resources they have, the luck of the weather, the luck of leadership rising to power, or the bad luck of poor leadership rising to power, the luck of timing, so on and so forth. Oh my goodness, there's so many different variables with that, but it does help in developing power. I mean, some nations just have to be a little bit luckier, right? So then there's the relational concept, that of relative power is the ratio of the power that two states can bring to bear against one another. And so thus two states who might have, just for example, two states might have outward intentions towards one another, but they remain in a stalemate, even if one happens to be wealthier, but the other happens to have a stronger military in and of itself. I mean, that can be that relative power. And that is the kind of a ratio that one might be able to use between one another. I mean, take for instance, could the United States conquer Canada? Yes. Thus, the United States kind of has greater power. Could the United States conquer China? No. Could China conquer the United States? No. Thus, the ratio is 1-to-1. So the United States to Canada might be 10-to-1. The United States to Mexico might be 20-to-1. The United States to China might be 1-to-1. The United States to Russia might be 1-to-1, or maybe 2-to-1. That kind of thing. So the logic of power suggests that the more powerful state will generally always prevail. Estimates of the power of two antagonists should explain the outcome. So, take the United States and Afghanistan. Estimates of the outcome based on a number of factors should have said that the United States could have, i.e., conquered, although that wasn't the intention, but conquered Afghanistan. The implications of the outcome, however, show many different things, and thus GDP does not always predict who will win a war. The United States being so much wealthier. I mean, in terms of power ratio, one would have thought of it 1,000-to-1 or 100-to-1. And for 15 years, it might have actually ended up being 1-to-1. Although so there's then a secondary variable to that, probably many, but regardless, there's also how much effort is the more powerful state willing to put in. Take, for instance, the fact that the United States is a nuclear power, Afghanistan is not. If the United States had used their nuclear weapons, could they not have conquered Afghanistan? And again, conquered is the wrong word, but just from a military perspective, could they not have subdued Afghanistan much quicker with the use of our nuclear capabilities? The answer is absolutely unequivocally yes. That in and of itself places the United States at 1,000-to-1 or 1,000,000-to-1 advantage, that in terms of that power ratio over Afghanistan. However, the United States, for philosophical purposes, and this is something that a realist might actually argue against, and that is that we placed essentially our biggest strength, maybe your right hand, if you will, we tied it behind our back, and then we went and fought left hand in Afghanistan. Then further that, so that's one aspect of kind of almost idealist, to the idealist perspective. That's one way of kind of leveling that ratio, leveling that playing field, if you will, giving the Afghanis some additional opportunity for success against the United States military, at least to prolong a stalemate. and prevent the United States from fully integrating itself the way it could in Germany and Italy and Japan after World War II. So then further, the United States generally never had enough soldiers to actually pull off the kind of victory on the ground that our soldiers could 100% do. I do not know if you recall, but the United States under Bush, oh gosh, I really should know this. It was either under Bush or early Obama. There was a push for a surge, and this surge meant they were going to throw in a lot more soldiers, a lot more weaponry. They're going to just kind of bring the American ground force in to help break the stalemate, and it worked. Well, if the surge worked, why did the United States work at those levels from the very beginning? Could that not have prevented a stalemate and ended the war much, much quicker? So that's another kind of, the United States already put its, tied one hand behind its back by stating we will not use nuclear weapons. A. B. We then, why wasn't the United States at surge levels the entire time? And thus, could they not have surged from a surge level and really just ended the war? Just kind of wiped out the Afghani terrorists and liberated the nation the way the intention was. So, again, implications of the outcome. GDP is not always the predictor of to win the war. There are so many other variables. So state power is a mix of thus many ingredients: natural resources, industrial capability, capacity, moral legitimacy, military preparedness, military willingness, and then popular support of the government. Long-term elements of power include total GDP, population size, territory, geography, natural resources. Less tangible long-term elements include pop culture, patriotism, education of the population, strength of the scientific and technological base, credibility of its commitments, reputation for keeping its word. In a state like the United States saying, oh my gosh, my nose, it's giving me such a bad headache too. Saying we will liberate, we will see this through, so on and so forth, and then following through till the end, showing the world, showing our allies we will follow through on a word, showing our enemies we will follow through. And the ability of one state's culture and values to consistently shape the thinking of other states, the power of ideas. By the way, this reminds me, oh gosh, this reminds me of a video game. I'm spacing on the name. Oh, Civilization. This reminds me of the game Civilization. I highly, highly recommend. It is essentially a game of power. It's a game of realism versus idealism. And you can try to win the game. The game is twofold. It's either like conquering the world, or it's surviving long enough to be able to become like a spacefaring power. But you don't necessarily have to conquer militarily. You can conquer through numerous different lenses. One of them basically being the idealist perspective of just the sharing of ideas. And so I highly recommend playing that game. I'd love to discuss that with you guys in the future. Hopefully I'll remember. Capabilities that allow actors to exercise influence in the short-term: military forces, the military-industrial complex, those industries that produce arms within a country, and their wealth and capability, and the quality of the state's bureaucracy. Less tangible for the short term: support and legitimacy that an actor commands in the short term from constituents and allies, basically elections, loyalty of the nation's army and politicians to its leader, which in the United States has historically never been a problem. Trade-offs, although this isn't just the United States discussion, I just was being illustrative of such, of that. Trade-offs among possible capabilities always exist. To the extent that one element of power can be converted into another, it is fungible. That is something that is mutually exchangeable with something else. So money in and of itself is fungible, which therefore can be a means of power. So note, realists tend to see military force as the most important element of national power in the short term. Now my ears are popping. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm sorry. I don't mean to complain, but oh my gosh, I just cannot breathe. I wonder if I can pause this. I just don't know. Golly, I'm sorry. It sounds so gross. I'll move quick. So morality, states have long clothed their actions, however aggressive, in rhetoric about their peaceful and defensive intentions. Oh, I do have to, otherwise it's going to shut down on me. There we go. Oh, there we go. I forgot to totally edit this one. I just suppose I didn't forget to totally edit it correctly. So, because I wanted to get rid of geopolitics. I didn't want to discuss that. Doesn't bother me. Okay, so morality. States have long clothed their actions, however aggressive and radical, about the peaceful and defensive intentions. So, these are two posters from World War I. These are propaganda posters. The one on the left, I don't know if you can see my mouse. Excuse me. The one on the left is a German propaganda poster. The one on the right is an American propaganda poster. What is the similarity? I'm sure you can see similarities, of course, Jesus Christ. So here we have in World War I, two enemies of one another propagandizing Christ, both stating that they are fighting God's fight, and not just God's fight, they're fighting Christ's fight, and they've got Christ on their side. So there's kind of the morality of it. Both sides, at least governments, arguing the morality of their position over another, and both using Christ as their defense. So it's just fascinating. All right, so what say you? What are your top three attributes to define national power? So this is a two-part what say you. What are your top three attributes to define national power? And can a nation the size of the United States, it's the size of an American state. Oh, that's right. Grow to be as powerful as the United States. So can a nation the size of an American state grow to be as powerful as the United States? Why or why not? And if the answer is, yes or no, I suppose is actually the appropriate answer. If the answer is yes, which I'm going to be honest with you, if the answer is yes, but just theorize with me here. How? Explain how that could be possible. Okay, so I told you anarchy sovereignty was coming. Here it is. Oh, that helped. So realists believe the international system exists in a state of anarchy, as I've discussed. So the term applies to the lack of a central government that can enforce rules. There is none. We have the United Nations. They do set rules. They have a UN army. I mean, they can, which is mostly American. So they can enforce to some degree, but they are, ultimately they are very weak. They cannot technically tell a single country what to do. So others suggest that international organizations and agreements bring all together. I skipped a line. So some say that some argue that a world government, I wonder if I can edit that real quick just so I don't forget. So argue. All right, just made a couple of changes to the lecture. I wonder if you guys might see that change. Okay, so some argue that a world government should be a solution. Others suggest that international organizations and agreements bring all together. So you've obviously got a number of international organizations, the UN in particular, but NATO and the EU and MENA, the Middle East, North African organizations or union and so forth. So, and then there's the African Union, actually. So there's a great number of them. So despite anarchy, however, the international system is far from chaotic. Otherwise, we would be at war constantly. The great majority of state interactions closely do adhere to norms of behavior and respect of one state's sovereignty over another. So sovereignty, of course, is a government which has a right in principle to do whatever it wants within its own territory. Now, again, that is within principle. Remember, the United States punished, I should say the United States, Western Europe punished Germany pretty hard after World War I, and the United States, I suppose, punished, if you will, punished leadership after World War II because of the Holocaust. Excuse me. Oh my gosh, my ears are popping my nose. I can't, you guys, I just can't. So the lack of a world police, by the way, the image in the back is from the 2004 puppet movie, Team America World Police, which I haven't seen since 2004. I don't even remember what it was about. So the lack of a world police to punish states if they break agreements makes enforcement of international agreements pretty difficult. So, for instance, North Korea and Iran and the nuclear facilities, China and their human rights violations, and then dozens of nations around the world that still perpetuate slavery. Slavery um, still exists on our continent. So, in practice, most states have a harder and harder time warding off interference in their affairs. But again, we still have a relatively stable system, international system, even so. So the United States has long been recognized as a symbolic holder of the world police title, for better for the United States or for worse. Such a title was easy to hold and was welcomed, actually. It was a welcomed title by most of the world following World War II, especially since most of Europe was still needing to rebuild, in the United States, obviously having not had to fight the battle or the war, excuse me, on our home turf, we had nothing to rebuild. Our soldiers came home and we just kept going. So the U.S. had turned back both German and Japanese imperialist aggressions and installed democratic governments in both those states as well as Italy. The United States was generally further willing to use its own money, often for influence, and use its own and sacrifice its own blood to protect its allies. However, as time passed and the wars ended and the Cold War was won, the United States never kind of said to the world, "Okay, thank you, good night. We're going to go home now." So the United States was no longer needed in such a visual capacity, yet remained in that position. So the United States intervened in situations, has continued to intervene in situations, and wield its power to prevent war, which is a realist perspective, as well as preventing the spread of terror. So, unfortunately, in some cases, when the use of force is used, or when force is used as a preventative measure, as it certainly has been, certainly since 2001, and the atrocities that could have occurred, such as war beginning by other outside powers, since those atrocities have never come to pass, it appears to some that the United States is more of an aggressor and not their enemies, which is, again, I'm such a goof for writing liberalism because I do mean idealism. I don't know what the heck I was typing there. In fact, I'm going to just go and fix that real quick. Just because I wonder if I can just. All right. So respect for the territorial integrity of all states within recognized borders is an important principle of IR. And then certainly an important perspective or principle, of realism as well. Well, okay, realism, and as I'm saying this out loud, I'm also recognizing realism and idealism. So there is, however, the security dilemma of those people, those states, protecting itself, if you will, to ensure. So a situation in which a state's actions are taken to ensure their own security, but threaten the security of other states. So, for instance, was the arms race. The United States and Soviet Union built up nuclear weapons to use in defense of one another, but were not all other nations in between who were not building up nuclear arsenals at risk for the United States and Soviet Union's own buildup. So it was, it's kind of the great irony, if you will, that the defense of the United States ended up potentially being a threat to the world to a degree, only if war had begun. But regardless, therefore, there are negative consequences of anarchy in the international system. And finally, balance of power. So balance of power refers to the general concept of one or more states' power being used to balance that of another state or group of states. So the balance of power idea can refer to any ratio of power capabilities between states or alliances, or it can mean only a relatively equal ratio. So alternatively, it can also refer to the process by which counterbalancing coalitions have repeatedly formed in history to prevent one state from conquering an entire region. So a modern example was after 9/11, the United States argued that they were going to build the greatest coalition, and that was the word that was used very often by the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, and others, but that the United States was going to build this tremendous coalition to stop the spread of organized terror around the world. Coalition, coalition, coalition. So this was part of the balance of power. Obviously, terrorists had gained the upper hand of the balance of power because they were able to take 4 airplanes and crash them and so on and so forth, and cause tremendous chaos to the world's most wealthy and otherwise most powerful military nation on planet Earth. But that obviously did sort of prove, and other states believed they were at risk too. There were plenty of other terrorist attacks. Nobody was ever hit as hard as the United States was, but there were other terrorist attacks all around Europe, Australia, and all around the world. And so it seemed that those organizations of terror had developed an upper hand. So if you think of that ratio again, it was not 1-to-1. It was 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 5-to-1, arguably, in favor of those terrorist organizations. And so the idea was building a coalition, to counterbalance those terrorist organizations, both militarily and through information, the sharing of information. So theory of balance of power, the counterbalancing occurs regularly and maintains stability of the international system. It does not imply peace, keep in mind, which is important to note, but rather a stability maintained by means of recurring wars that adjust power relations. So think back to now the Cold War. The Cold War is often, why was it cold? Because there was no hot war. There was no actual fighting between the United States and Soviet Union, except in Korea and except in Vietnam. So there was a balance of power between the United States and Soviet Union. Absolutely. The reason the United States and the Soviet Union never went to war with one another directly is because the power was balanced. They knew that, that was the whole idea of mutually assured destruction. They were so balanced, both were assured that in nuclear war, both would be gone. However, it doesn't necessarily mean peace. There's still going to be struggles, and the Cold War through Vietnam and Korea proved that. Alliances in these situations are key. It is, of course, quicker, cheaper, and more effective to utilize an alliance militarily than building one's own capabilities. States do not always balance against the strongest actor, however. There's a term called bandwagoning, in which they will actually join with the strongest actor rather than join against the strongest actor to balance them out. They will hope to essentially be on the side of history, be on the right side of history, by being with the victor. So then just discussing like great powers and middle powers. So the most powerful states in the system exert most of the influence on the international events and therefore get the most attention from IR scholars and historians alike. So in these cases, only a handful of states possess the majority of the world's power resources. So it's just a few examples. Until the early 1900s, the world's most powerful nations were England, France, and India. Through it's supposed to say through World War II. Let me just fix that, just because it's driving me nuts. I hate that I have these typos. Through World War II, the primary powers were the United States, England, Germany, Russia, and Japan. Through the Cold War after World War II, it was just the United States and the Soviet Union. After the Cold War, it was just the United States. Today, it is the United States and China. And I ask metaphorically, I'm not expecting a response. What is tomorrow? And I actually do wonder if Russia is going to grow back up in that that international threat. However, if Russia and China align as they did in the 50s, then the United States might be in trouble. Then the United States is then going to have to develop a strong coalition with the West and just hope that states like England and France and Germany and Italy and so forth, that they are willing to stand up against the Russians and Chinese with the Americans. So we'll see. The difference being is that war would likely not occur in Europe, like war would likely occur in the United States, or at least, war would likely occur in the United States, or maybe on the waters, but not sure. All right, so great powers are generally considered the half dozen or so most powerful states. So these were kind of the superpowers over here that I was referencing. The great powers, which these two are also great powers, but regards, these as well. So until the past century, the club was exclusively European until the United States decided to break the mold. The United States and Japan, honestly. The great powers are defined generally as states that can be defeated militarily only by another great power. So generally, these great powers have the world's strongest military forces and the strongest economies. So the United States, China, Russia, Japan, Germany, France, Great Britain. The United States being the world's foremost superpower, although China is closing in, creeping up to second with the world's largest population. They have rapid economic growth, which I have heard many times is not sustainable, but it's still sustaining as far as I know, as well as a large military and a credible nuclear arsenal. Middle powers rank somewhere below the great powers. Some are large but not highly industrialized. Others may have small with specialized capabilities. So examples are Canada, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Poland, Ukraine, South Korea, and Australia. Other larger other larger industrialized countries include India, Indonesia, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Nigeria, South Africa, Israel, Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan. And then in terms of power distribution, the concept of the distribution of power among states, power distribution is the concept of the distribution of power among states in the international system, and it can apply to all the states in the world or to just one region. So polarity refers to the number of independent power centers in the system. A multipolar system, has 5 or 6 centers of power, which are not grouped in alliances. They are just individual equal powers. The tripolar system has 3 great centers of power. The unipolar system has a single center of power around which all others revolved, and this is essentially a hegemony. The power transition theory finally holds that the largest wars result from challenges to the top position in the status hierarchy, when the rising power is surpassing or threatening to surpass the most powerful state. And this is why the United States could be at war with China at some point. In some point in your lifetime, our lifetimes. So this is the multipolar, bipolar, and unipolar system. So again, hopefully you can see my mouse. But this is a top-down view. So you can see the multipolar. These are all 5 interchangeable equal powers. They are equal to one another. And then this is the side view. It's supposed to appear three-dimensionally, but you can just see though that none of them stand apart from the others. They are all equal plane. But then there's the bipolar. So you've got 2 major powers who then have their spheres of influence in those smaller circles. And then that's the 2-dimensional one. But then 3-dimensionally, you can see that those major powers stand above the 2, their smaller spheres. So this would have certainly been during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union, Western allies, North American allies, Eastern Bloc allies to the Soviets, as well as China. And then there's the unipower or hegemony. And that is, so again, there's a singular power and then all kind of work in dominance, not work in dominance, work in unison for the dominant power. So an example actually could have been the Soviet Union, Russia, and their Soviet states that they annexed. So which would have been the Eastern Bloc states. So this would have been the unipolar system. All right, so what say you? can you provide at least one additional example of from what I just gave, other than what I just gave, excuse me, from world history, past or present, for each of the 3 distribution systems. So please provide at least one example. You can't talk to neighbors, but go ahead and write it down. Go ahead and hit pause. Ready, set, go. And we're back. All right, so we are finished. So just a heads up on our second assignment. Go ahead and let's just look at this very quickly. So when it gets time to do the assignment, wait, literature review. Oh, this is the wrong. Oh, this is for my other class, Burgle Flickle. You guys, I'm a goofball. Okay, well, ignore that. We'll have to just talk about it. That's for my other class. Okay, well, that's all I have then. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and shoot me a text. Otherwise, I love you all. Have a great weekend, and please stay healthy. I will do my best to get healthy myself, and I will see you on Wednesday. I love you all. See you later. Bye.